If this is your first time here, welcome. And if it's your 13th time here, welcome again. But we'd love to have you as part of our podcast family. So subscribe, hit that subscribe button, and you'll be notified when new episodes drop. We don't want you to miss a single thing. So hit that follow or subscribe button and listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you go for podcasts. Hello and welcome to Positively Joy, the podcast on searching for the light in all seasons. I'm your host, Yvette Walker. And today we are talking about comics, but not just any comic. We're talking about Daredevil. And we're talking about Daredevil because he's a curious and very interesting character who actually has a religious tradition and during his run had a crisis in faith. And so I thought that would be a really interesting thing to talk about on the show today. But not just myself, I have some comic experts, and we need that because I am not one. But I want to thank Kade, Poulson, and Anthony Brown for being on the show today. Guys, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
All right, so Kade is a longtime comics fan, now living in Florida and working on research grants. And Anthony is a longtime comics fan as well, with a keen insight on social justice issues and works in the medical field. And where are you living now, Anthony?
I'm in Moore, Oklahoma.
Okay. They both met in Oklahoma and were co-hosts along with former Oklahoman.com writer Matt Price on the Infinite Danger Room podcast. And that was for the Oklahoman and Oklahoman.com. So their pedigree is perfect for this. I'm really excited to get talking about Daredevil and his background and his religious tradition. So let's get started. First off, gentlemen, how'd you get started in the comic book world? And Anthony, let's take you first.
For me, it was something that was handed down to me from my father. My father read and collected comic books, and then I guess when he felt like I came of age, he gave me his comic book collection to just build on and read and grow. And so I actively collected comic books, I don't know, for close to 30 years, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then I decided that collecting the actual physical comics wasn't something that I wanted to do, and I started to collect them in the trade paperback form, which are just collected versions of several comic books. One, just kind of conserve space, but two, I just kind of had an epiphany where I realized the stories were more important to me than like the physical comic book itself. And so having a lot of older comics that I couldn't necessarily open and read because of their value didn't appeal to me as much as the story itself. I'd rather read this story than to have this book in a format that I could never open again. Otherwise, it may lose $300 in value or something crazy like that.
Okay. It's always great to hear the family traditions. That's really nice. Kade, what about you?
Well, mine are probably the same. I have an older brother, and when he started going to school, and I was younger and I wasn't in school yet, I could tell he was kind of learning to read, and so I couldn't read yet. My parents told me about Batman, Superman, and I think I was always interested in those, but buying the comics, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, I could look at the story even if I couldn't read it, and so I came from a very small town called Watauga in Oklahoma. And we had a grocery store that had a few comics on the rack. And he'd buy me one every now and then. And he would read it to me. And I would try to remember what happened in the story, but I'd use the pictures. And so that with Batman coming out in 1989 with Michael Keaton, that movie really started my love for comic books and collecting and following the Batman stories and Superman. I got to watch all the Christopher Reeve movies, from when I was a kid. They've been out for probably at least about 10 years. So I just developed a love for watching all those movies and a passion for reading the stories in the comics and new TV series. The Batman animated series was coming out when I was a little kid in early 1990s. So all of those things mixed together created my love for comics.
And you mentioned comics are out in lots of different versions and different media. And I
Yes.
think that some people, like myself, I don't have a background of reading comic books growing up, but I have Netflix, so now
Yeah.
I am learning about a lot of the comic book characters in this particular media form. And we're here to talk about Daredevil because I just think he's so interesting. And it's not that other comic book characters don't have some kind of religious tradition, but I felt like the fact that they dealt with it in the storyline so much, I'd never seen that before. And again, no expert, don't have a huge comic book history or tradition, but I just never seen that before. So, Kate, if you could, would you describe Daredevil's religious background and kind of how we see him in? And let's talk about let's be specific to if you're talking about the Netflix version, which some people may have seen, or if it's another comic book version because they may have gone into it either deeper or in a different way.
Sure. So I'll start with the original comics first. Daredevil debuted in 1964, created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett. You find out really in that first issue that Matt Murdock, so that's his full name, Matt Murdock, becomes Daredevil. Starts off when he's a kid. He's raised by a single father. I'm just going to kind of give a quick synopsis here. A single father who's a boxer, and you kind of find out that he is a boxer, but he takes falls, and he doesn't want Matt to be like he is. He wants Matt to be better. Through the first issue and several issues after that, you kind of learn more about his Catholic faith. But Matt's father, Battling Jack Murdock, he is killed in the first issue because instead of taking a fall like he was supposed to do, he ended up winning a fight so that he could prove to his son that he wasn't a loser, I guess, for lack of better words. He wanted to show him that he stood for something.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that out in the Netflix series as well.
Right.
But you find out about his Catholic background, and they build on that a lot as the comic book series go. I haven't read all of the Daredevil comics, and the ones from the 60s probably a little harder to read now, but there's a lot in Frank Miller's run, which we'll talk about that as we go. But his background, he is heavily raised Catholic, and that's the same in the shows, in the movies. It's very pervasive in his origin in all of the media. He is raised Catholic. He usually goes to confession and talks to the priest there, who's kind of his confidant in his vigilante activities.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, anything Kate left out that you'd like to add?
No, I think he was spot on. The Catholic faith part is a big part of the character. And also a part of his origin. One of the things that happens that varies from the Netflix TV version versus the comic book version is that Daredevil loses his sight because of an automobile accident involving like some radioactive waste that was being transported. And so that's what causes him his blindness. And as a result of him losing his sight, he gets enhanced hearing. And so it works as radar for him. And so in the comics or in the Netflix TV show, I don't know that it went that exact same route about how and why. And so the Kingpin is actually involved in Daredevil's origin because it was his company that was transporting the radioactive waste and ultimately caused him to lose his sight. He also had a part to play in the death of his father. However, in the Netflix series, that was kind of too long and drawn out. And in comics, the characters don't really seem to age. Mm-hmm. So as Daredevil is doing all these things, the Kingpin just kind of looks like the Kingpin the entire time. Whereas in the Netflix series, they needed them to be kind of closer in age in order to be rivals and things like that. So things would sync up a lot better than what they are. So, but he is a blind hero. And so that's kind of the thing that's kind of the draw to him. And so when Stan Lee was creating these characters, he gave all of them, for lack of a better phrase, a quirk or something kind of associated with that to make them unique. And so that was the thing that he gave Matt Murdock, was his blindness, and using that as a strength.
Okay. Looking back on it, I find that we see him go to church. We see him have conversations with the priest there, Father Paul Lantom. They're pretty close. At some point, Father Lantom recognizes who he is, understands who he is. I don't want to give too much away because there's some people who might actually go watch it. But I think it's interesting because he has one conversation, and usually he comes to see him after he's been like really beaten bloody or something happens like that. But he came to see him, and he said, and it was right after he and Claire is a nurse who he, at least in the Netflix series, might have had a relationship with. Of course, she's also, with Luke Cage at some point. But at this point, she's just his nurse and friend, and she compares him to martyrs and saviors who get bloody and are alone all the time. So he has that conversation with Father Lantom, and he also asked him something interesting. He asked him, did God create him to be this way? Because from what I can tell, again, no expert, a lot of the powered people, this happens in some kind of an accident or some kind of an evil scientist did something bad, like Jessica Jones, something like that. But he asked him, did the fact that I am this way, God didn't create him that way. He wasn't born like that, but did God intend for him to be that way? And I thought that was an interesting conversation. Do you remember that, or did they talk about that in the books?
It does come up quite a bit in the books. I'll go ahead and defer to Kade. It looks like he was ready to say something really quick.
Sure, actually, they do talk about that a lot in the books. I mean, I think that's part of his Catholicism showing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're always questioning that. He's questioning his faith. Actually, in the newest volumes by Chip Zdarsky that I've been reading, Matt finds out that it's very normal to question your faith, and that's what you're supposed to do so that you can grow as a person in your relationship with God. So let me see if I actually wrote some notes down about that.
Okay.
This is from Chip Zdarsky's Volume 2. It's called No Devils, Only God. And this is found in issue number 9, page 1 through 3. He is having a chess match with Reed Richards. And basically what he's saying is that he's having some trouble understanding God and his wishes, and if he even exists, essentially. He wants to know Reed Richards' opinion because he's a scientist. He's the leader of the Fantastic Four. And Reed Richards, after listening to Matt, who says, I'm a man about rules. This has been baked into my religion, and part of the reason why he becomes a lawyer. He believes that rules help people to be better so that they don't harm each other, so that they help each other. But, he kind of loses his way, and he says that he can't tell what God's plans for him are. And sometimes he thinks maybe he's worked against God's rules, or maybe he's twisted one of God's, interpretations that he had in front of him, and maybe he's suffered because of it, and maybe he's caused suffering. And he said he's been trying hard to follow these rules. Once again, I think he's seeing this kind of from a lawyer's perspective, and these rules being, you shouldn't be a vigilante. You should adhere to the laws that are around you, but here you are trying to right wrongs in an illegal way. And you can tell it's this internal battle for Matt. And Reed just pretty much shares with him that, he's a man of science, and that there's been a lot of things he's experienced in his world that he can't really explain. He's traveled to unimaginable places. He's seen cosmic beings that represent abstract ideas. And, he's maybe even seen an afterlife. And so he can't deny God's existence. And he can't say that he can confirm it. But he says that he suspects that perhaps there is some type of being, and that there may not be textual rules, and there may not be one correct religion, but he believes that it's this morality that's instilled within us, these morals that kind of help guide us to right and wrong, and those form religion, and they form laws that we have. And so Matt kind of comes to the conclusion that maybe this is part of everyone's journey, is that, maybe that's what faith is. We can't find reason in it. We can't find logic. It's something that we aren't able to understand. So maybe we all have this journey in understanding God, and we have to try to listen to this person he creates within us and try to do what's right and try to avoid what's wrong. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit of background.
Yeah, because it's not unusual for comic book heroes to be moral people. In fact, there's a really interesting, and this is a whole nother show, I guess, but it's very interesting. There's a Netflix, or is it Amazon Prime, show called The Boys about power, about heroes who are not very moral at all, actually. But most comic book heroes that we see do have this morality. I remember the conversation that Matt had with Father Paul about, because his nickname is the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen is a neighborhood in New York City he feels invested in protecting. And talk about duality. So he's a vigilante, like you said, breaking the law. He is a lawyer supporting the law. He is an action hero. He's blind and not supposed to have this kind of power that he has. So there's a lot of duality going on with him. But he talks to Father Paul and he says, is there a devil inside me, basically? And Father Paul tells him, maybe it's your angels that are really trying to push you to do things. It was interesting. So I noticed that in the Netflix series, St. Patrick's Cathedral in Hell's Kitchen, it's a major setting. He's there frequently. Matt does speak frequently with Father Paul. And I wonder if you guys could say, what does this say to the average fan? Not every fan is going to have a religious tradition, but we do live in a Judeo-Christian society with lots of religions, not just Jewish and Christian, but that's just, our society is based on Judeo-Christian beliefs. So certainly some fans may have these traditions, some might not. But what do you think this says to the average fan to see religion on display on a show like this?
I think given the rise of superheroes and just kind of the way that they have become ingrained in culture, I would say in the last 10 years with the rise of the Avengers series and kind of everything that spun off from that, I think that it's good to see. I think that it speaks to the diversity of the superhero community and what Marvel and Netflix were trying to accomplish. Because if you look at what they've done, they've had gay heroes, they've had straight heroes, they've had bi heroes. I mean, they've had people from all walks of life. Who knows when they're going to be able to start making movies again? But they announced that they're going to have a transgender hero as well at some point. So I think that what they're doing is they're speaking to all people and saying that no matter what walk of life you come from or what your persuasions may be, there is a place for you within the comic book community or even the superhero genre and community. And so it's kind of welcoming to all people. From a faith aspect, I think that it's telling people that it's important for people to believe in something. Like we can, obviously, when it comes to Christianity or Christ in general, there are several different veins with that. And so there's the Catholic, then there's all the Protestant religions, and, there's Muslim and everything else. And so I think one of the things that this shows is that, faith is important. Find your faith, find something to believe in, because regardless of what religion you believe in, none of them teach hate. Regardless of what it is that you worship or who it is you may worship. So they teach brotherhood, peace, friendship, helping out your fellow man. And so that's where Daredevil's battle comes in, is that in his quest to do good, and he feels like to use this gift that he has for good, he wants to make sure that he's doing right by the faith that was ingrained in him. And so beating people up isn't necessarily the best thing to do for him, but he's doing that in a quest for justice. And a couple of the times when he has went out and just senselessly beat people up, that's when he felt the worst. But when he was, working for good and helping people out and delivering justice, that's when he had the most sense of fulfillment.
Follow-up question. So, Anthony, you told me that most comics fans kind of see Daredevil as synonymous with three things: blindness, the Catholic Church, and Kingpin, who is his arch enemy and a very, very hateful and evil person. Um, so you just talked about how comics are really broadening and including a larger community among their heroes, and they're therefore responding to their fans. But do you think that Daredevil fans, or really any comics fans, are interested in these issues of faith and religion? Do they see themselves in the difficulties and crises that these superheroes may have? I mean, obviously, I may not be a vigilante and I'm not beating people up, but maybe, maybe I'm questioning. Maybe somebody in my family is sick and I'm questioning, God. Do they see themselves in these characters?
I think so, because when adversity hits, I think that it's somewhat natural for people to have crisis of faith. Especially given that the way the world seems to be shifting when it comes to acceptance of different things that, from my parents' generation and generations before that, where they could never imagine openly gay marriage being legal. And some of the other things that we're moving on. I mean, even today, with the Black Lives Matter movement, or, I think that history will remember what's going on right now as the second civil rights movement. When you see all these things going on, there are people who felt like they have been on the right side of the equation. And now that things are becoming more clear, or veils of information are being removed from people's vision, they are starting to see that, the line that they thought they were on the right side of, they may be closer to towing that line, or they may be on the wrong side of the line. And so maybe they are having crisis of faith to say, like, hey, God, what do I do now? Or, hey, God, what I believe about this or about that or about these groups of people is now changing, or the world that we're living in is accepting something that, biblically, it says that we shouldn't. And so that's kind of a bigger kind of conversation. I don't know how much you want to get into that. Like the subject of gay marriage is always kind of a hot button issue, kind of regardless of your politics. Like if you say that you're a person of faith, but the thing that whenever I have those conversations, I say in order for us to have a conversation or even a debate about gay marriage, we have to agree on what marriage is. And that's a religious institution. If you don't recognize it as a religious institution, then we're comparing apples and oranges. So what we're arguing for or against isn't really the same. So we have to agree on what it is that we're looking at before we kind of go down that road. So I think that it's important for people to kind of have an understanding of the topic or what it is that they're wanting to go after in order to find that common ground. And I think that that's where we're at now, is people are trying to find a commonality, because things that we were taught in school, we find out that things were omitted. Things weren't really as they appeared, or, and things like that. And so that's why people in today's age may be having crisis of faith, because what we knew for so long is no longer what is happening today.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I always tell my students that media reflects our culture always. Movies, comic books, what's happening at the time. Usually you're going to see somehow that reflected in the media, the piece of media that you're talking about. Kade, you want to jump in here?
Sure. I think when people see real things, religion in comic books, it helps them to relate. These are real struggles that people deal with. And at the end of the day, while Daredevil has heightened senses, he's still human. He's not indestructible. He doesn't have super strength or super speed. All of his skill that he's had to learn how to hone his radar sense. He's had to learn martial arts. So he's a human person, and there's times his radar sense can work against him. At the end of the day, he's a blind man still. So when you see Matt Murdock in the church, you don't necessarily see Daredevil there. He's there as Matt Murdock, the lawyer. It seems like he even kind of gives this own dichotomy, and that's part of his struggle between who he is, who he was born, and who he became, which is Daredevil. And that's the struggle too, because he doesn't really see himself. While he is the same person doing that stuff, he knows it's wrong. He knows he shouldn't be doing it. And that's his struggle with himself. And sometimes we have those struggles. We know we shouldn't be doing something, and we do it, And if you're going by Catholicism, doing what's wrong is sinful. And so you have that guilt for it. And that's why you go to confession. And that's why you talk to the priest. And that's very common. I mean, like you said, Judeo-Christian society, most people believe in something probably similar to what Matt Murdock believes in. But I think even if you're a person who doesn't, even if you're not a Christian or Jewish or have those types of backgrounds, I think that what you see Matt Murdock's doing in these books is he has an internal struggle once again. And I think everybody has that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how it's relatable. I think that people go through that all the time. It's daily. It's, every minute somebody's out there with something that they're, upset about that maybe is beyond their control. And that's part of it too. I think Daredevil helps you to see when he's going to church, sometimes he's upset about things that he just can't control. He wants to fight everybody that's bad. He wants to get them in jail if he can, but there's people he just can't beat. And, a lot of the time that's Kingpin or that's another criminal, and he can't beat them for whatever reason. And that's frustrating, but it's just a part of life. And that's what I appreciate about the book so much, and the character is it's very real in a lot of ways. So it just kind of hits home, I think, for a lot of people.
Kade, is Kingpin the devil?
Is Kingpin the devil? I don't see him as the devil. I just see him as a man who has learned to take advantage of a lot of situations, of a lot of people. He's learned how to rise to the top, and obviously it's not ethical. He intimidates people. He is like the perfect idea of fascist. He uses fear to control people. I don't think he's the devil, but I think that he's a really bad dude. And I think that that's obviously why Matt Murdock fights against him. But I think Matt Murdock sees a little bit of the devil in everybody, including himself. And maybe that's why he's Daredevil. Maybe that's why he's a lawyer by day trying to do good. And maybe that's why he put on a devil costume, is because he knows when he goes out and does it, he's not necessarily doing something that's legal, and it's not something that he necessarily should be doing. I mean, he's kind of doling out his own form of justice, and it's not technically lawful, and he knows that. So maybe he sees himself, and once again, as part of the problem in a way. But I think he also thinks it's come to this. This is what I have to do to protect people and to protect, my city.
Come back to hear part 2 of my conversation with comic book experts Kate Poulson and Anthony Brown as we talk about Daredevil, the superhero with a religion. And as always, thanks for listening. This has been the Positively Joy podcast. If you have not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button or that follow button so you don't miss any new episodes. We'll see you next time. Same bat channel, as they say in the comic book world. Farewell for now.